listener production.
Hello, welcome to The Briefing. I'm Sasha Barbagat. Monday to Friday, our team delivers the headlines. But today we're turning the spotlight onto the human toll behind these tragic events. In today's episode, we're focusing on schoolteacher Nahed Mawassi and her daughter Zainab, a psychology student, who have suffered an unimaginable loss. 18 members of their family were killed when the IDF bombed a residential building in northern Lebanon, a Christian village, without warning.
That was 4 generations.
Exactly, four
killed.
generations, from the grandmother to the great-great-grandchild. That's it, they're all gone.
I want their story to be told, and I don't want their death to be used as an excuse to harm more Lebanese people.
Their conversation with Antoinette Lattouf is coming up later in this episode. But first, it is time for today's headlines with Chris Spiru on Monday, October 28.
Morning, Sasha. Morning, everybody. Queensland's new government is looking to get straight to work this week, with David Crisafulli to be sworn in as the state's 41st Premier today. The Liberal National Party celebrating the weekend's election win, claiming 48 seats over Labor's 30. After coming out on Saturday night refusing to concede, outgoing Premier Stephen Miles last night put up a video on Insta acknowledging the loss.
This morning I called David Crisafulli and congratulated him on becoming Queensland's Premier. Being Premier of Queensland is the greatest honour of my life, and it's one that he has rightfully earned.
The Liberal leader and his deputy will be sworn in as a temporary cabinet of 2 so they can get cracking on the party's promised policies, including introducing tougher youth crime laws by Christmas.
Yeah, this was a bruising defeat for not only Labor, which has been in power in Queensland for the last 10 years, but also for the Greens, who have only claimed 1 seat. Now, they had initially projected winning as many as 6. Federal Labor, though, has been quick to dismiss claims it's a sign of things to come, instead seizing on the Greens' result with hopes it can win back inner city seats from the party come next year's federal election. But the minor party says Saturday's result shows the ALP had wasted effort fighting the Greens rather than working with them. So, look, overall, a big win for Queensland's LNP party, but it's not all roses because now the party is going to face this pressure from national colleagues to back Peter Dutton's nuclear plan. Now, you might remember David Crisafulli had run his campaign on the idea that his party was opposed to nuclear power in Queensland. Peter Dutton's plan includes 2 nuclear plants for Queensland should Dutton win the election next year with the coalition. But the Nationals leader came out yesterday and said he expects all the states and territories to fall into line should the coalition win the federal election, essentially saying if we win, the Australian people have given us a mandate to do this. And to an extent, I think he's right because this election is going to be fought on cost of living and nuclear.
Sticking with Australian politics, you might have caught the backlash towards Anthony Albanese over the weekend for the number of upgraded flights he's received from Qantas. 9 newspapers revealing the PM has been handed 22 free upgrades on the Flying Kangaroo over the last decade. Albanese has come out to say every single one was declared at the time, so there is no issue. However, his relationship with former Qantas boss Alan Joyce has been in the spotlight recently since the federal government decided to block Qatar Airways from landing more flights in Australia. A new book by journalist Joe Aston claims Albanese would deal directly with Joyce on several occasions and asked for his son Nathan to be made a member of the Chairman's Lounge in 2022 after the federal election, Sash.
Yeah, and that's a pretty big accusation because when that came out, there was that Nathan had access to the Chairman's Lounge, which is extremely exclusive. That's not Qantas Lounge. That's not me going in and having a glass of champagne and taking a photo with my boarding pass. The Chairman's Lounge is reserved for elite athletes, politicians, media personalities. Like, it is not for just anyone. And when it came out that Albanese's son had access to it, there were all these questions, well, how the hell did that happen? So those claims by Aston are pretty serious, I suppose, and asking the question of, well, you know, what's the relationship between Albanese and Joyce and how has that influenced the federal government's decision-making? It's also worth noting the opposition Transport Minister, Bridget McKenzie, wants the Prime Minister to answer more questions. They're not happy with how he's responded to this so far. She told the ABC that the Australian public needs to be told exactly how many private and public upgrades were provided to Mr Albanese and his family and what the total value of those upgrades are. Over to the US now, where we are, count it, 9 days out from the presidential election, and polling continues to show it is going to be a neck-and-neck race. But the gender divide is growing, with a New York Times poll showing Donald Trump is leading with male voters by 14%, while Kamala Harris is ahead with women by 12%. Trump's lead with men this time around is larger than what he had in 2020. And Chris, they've both been leaning into this, as we saw over the weekend. Starting with Trump, he appeared on Joe Rogan's podcast on Saturday our time, and in just over a day, the ep has had more than 28 million views on YouTube alone.
He endorsed me. By the way, he gave me the nicest endorsement. You should do the same thing, Joe, because you cannot be voting for Kamala. Kamala, you're not a Kamala person. I know you. I've watched you. I know him better than he does. I have watched you for so many years. You're not a Kamala person.
Yeah, so the episode goes for almost 3 hours. They cover everything from North Korea to Elon Musk, Kamala Harris's IQ, aliens. He almost admitted to losing the 2020 election but stopped himself. And he said doctors declared his ability to run on a steep treadmill was, quote, unbelievable.
Yeah, as for Harris, she had 2 of the 3 stars from Destiny's Child introduce and endorse her at a rally in Houston, Texas on Saturday.
Houston, we are grabbing back the pen.
That was Kelly Rowland there. She was joined on stage by Beyonce, speaking about women's rights, racism and division in America.
And of course, Destiny's Child, very popular with millennial women and probably Gen Z to an extent. At least Beyonce, she's like a huge, obviously, cultural icon. So both of them tapping into that male-female voter space and trying to win any extra votes that they can get.
Yeah, and something else interesting that happened over the weekend, Sash, is Candace Owens, the right-wing influencer, she had her visa refused by the Australian government, and that's ahead of her first Australian speaking tour, which is due to start next month. She has been branded conservative and controversial for some of her views, and that's things that extend to the Holocaust, Islam, black rights, traditional gender roles and things like that. So the Immigration Minister, Tony Burke, he said that the commentator could, quote, incite discord in almost every direction. So yeah, her visa's been cancelled. And people had paid just general admission to Candace Owens Live. That was $95. And you could pay up to $1,500 for a VIP package. So that obviously included a meet and greet. But I don't know, it'll be interesting to see now what happens. She hasn't commented on it, so we'll see what happens with tickets.
And there are few things more irritating than a line cutter at the airport, so a major airline is looking to bust them. American Airlines has announced it's trialling new technology that had let off a siren if someone tries to scan their boarding pass before their assigned group has been called. So this is when you're waiting to board, it's a big flight, and they go, okay, you're in section A, B, C or D, you've got to stick to your ticket, and you wait in line when your number's called up. Yeah, they want to call these people out. So not only will this siren tell the flight attendants, that this person is a line cutter, and then they'll send them to the back of the queue. All their fellow passengers will know as well. It'd just be such public embarrassment.
Yeah, it's like putting a box on someone's head and ringing the shame bell. It's actually so embarrassing.
It's a dunce's cap. The tech will be used at 3 airports in the US as part of a trial. And look, it is a trial, but they have already started rolling it out. And the airline says it's pleased with the results so far. I mean, look, I'm one of the great observers at the airport. I'm always watching, like, no, they should not be getting up yet. I can tell that they're not doing the right thing. No. And I do the tuts.
Yeah, but have you ever cut the line, Sacha Barbagat?
Nope.
No,
I follow the rules.
No.
There's nothing, like, you are not entitled to board quicker. Just wait like everybody else.
Yes.
But I will say, air travel is dehumanising enough.
Yeah.
This is just adding another layer to that. Chris, thanks so much for joining us for the headlines today. Next up, we are changing pace and we are sharing the devastating and heartbreaking story of a Lebanese Australian family who woke up one day to hear the worst news possible. Stick around. It's a really, really compelling chat.
As the deadly assaults on Lebanon continue, a couple of weeks ago, one Australian family woke up to the most devastating news. 4 generations of their relatives had been killed in the bombing of a single residential building in a Christian village more than 120 kilometres north of the Israeli border. 18 family members who'd been displaced from the country's south a year ago were killed, and their ages ranged from a 6-month-old baby to a 95-year-old great-grandmother. Nahed Mawassi and her daughter Zainab lived in Lebanon for 8 years between 2012 and 2020. Today, they share their loss and heartbreak and how they feel about the IDF's claim that they were supposedly after an unnamed Hezbollah commander. There are only 4 survivors, and this devastated family is hoping the Australian government will consider humanitarian visas, as it did for 5,700 Ukrainians following Russia's invasion. Zainab and Nahed, welcome to the briefing. Zainab, I'll start with you. Like most of the 250,000 Lebanese Australians, you have family in Lebanon. What's the past year or so been like in terms of worrying about their safety?
It's been a living hell. We're afraid to wake up in the morning and just to see the news because of the time difference. We stay up till 2 a.m. watching the news and seeing all of these buildings and places we've been just completely demolished and wondering, did we know someone that was in that building? Oftentimes we do. We know these people, and we're seeing our country. It's heartbreaking. It's really, really, really upsetting, and we're constantly on our nerves waiting for horrible news every single day.
20 family members, or at least 20 family members who stayed in one group, were displaced from their homes in South Lebanon last October because of cross-border rockets between Hezbollah and Israel. What happened at first?
So within a week of the conflict, most of our village pretty much emptied out because we're right on the border. My uncles moved to a village called Crisafulli, which isn't very far away. They found homes that they lived in there, and they were actually okay there because it was relatively safe, and they were there for many months, and there was always that hope that they were going to go back to their home. And they still had that hope until the major hits started happening on Lebanon, when it escalated and they had to leave there as well.
And so when Israel invaded Lebanon, was it safe for your family in the south, or did they have to flee entirely?
No, definitely not safe. They had to leave. They stayed 3 days on the road trying to find somewhere safe to kind of stay so that they can all, be together. And eventually they did find somewhere in the north of Lebanon.
And Zainab, what did you hear from your family about the journey north?
Yeah, I remember the night it all happened, we were all messaging multiple people. Everyone was messaging someone in Lebanon, and everyone was telling us we're leaving. They thought they were safe. We're leaving. There's bombs on the road. We're seeing things we shouldn't have to see.
What sorts of things?
Burnt cars. I'm hoping they didn't say it flat out like dead bodies, but we'd assume they did because a lot of people died on the road. And a drive that would normally take 1 hour to get to the capital ended up taking 10 hours for most people. And that is if they had enough petrol to even get them there. It was a really scary night here in Australia for us. So I can't even imagine how it would have been for them on the road.
And so they finally make it to the north, into a Christian village. And it's your great-grandmother who is 95, several uncles, cousins, a pregnant woman, children. Did you feel relief? Were you reassured that they would be safe there?
At first, when they first got to the north, we heard stories about some people maybe not being very welcome. Majority of people were very, very welcoming. They were opening their homes. We were seeing that all over the news. And my uncle here in Australia had found them an apartment in the north. However, when they got there, a resident, I'm not sure if she was in the apartment or a neighbouring apartment, wouldn't let them in. She was convinced that, them coming from the south, it's not safe for anyone there. It would bring Israel to them, basically. And so they couldn't stay there. They had to stay in a hotel for overnight. And when they got to the hotel, I felt relieved. I don't know why, I just thought, surely they wouldn't hit a hotel. How can you justify that? But then again, they do justify quite a lot of things. And then when my uncle found them the house in Zgharta, where they were, the last house they were in, I honestly felt, that's it, they're safe. We don't have to worry about them at all. We have family in more dangerous places, but they were supposed to be safe.
And Nahed, you've got voice memos from your auntie throughout her journey. You can hear the distress in her voice. Then she gets to this village and she's reassuring you. that we're okay, we're relaxed?
We feel settled. It's not like after a minute we have to leave here and escape. Thanks for asking, darling of my heart.
Did you anticipate waking up to the news that the entire building had been bombed and almost everybody died?
That was the last thing on my mind. I actually was getting ready for work. I went to bed early and my daughter came in screaming and shouting into my room and I just jumped. She said, I don't know what's happened. It's Batamo. There's something happening. And I'm like, don't tell me. I don't want to know right now. I want to live a minute or two without knowing. My heart told me, but I didn't want to accept it. And the last thing that I could have thought of was that them happening, as my daughter said, they were in a safer place than most other people we knew. We expected news from other people, but we just did not expect it about them. And she was very happy there in terms of them being safe. And she said, but don't worry about us. We're in a very happy place. The people around us here are great. We're very welcomed here. And since then, I've heard stories of people from the village telling how much they were loved, even though in those short 2 weeks that they were there. People in the village grew to love them very much because that's how they are. They're the sweetest people on earth, were the sweetest people on earth.
So 18 people died, age range from 95 to 6 months old. How many survivors? But also, how did you find out?
I got a message from my cousin here in Australia. She just said, Zainab, do you know what's going on? They're all at my grandparents and they're screaming and crying. I call her. She's like, I don't know what's going on. They're saying it's my Uncle Hussein. I just screamed. I'm like, Mom, please don't freak out, but something's happened and I don't know what. And I was hoping my dad could wake up and just find us news right away. He made a few phone calls and they said on the phone, it's the Haji Sirri, my great-grandmother's family. And our hearts dropped. I think I dropped to the floor at that point because we knew they were all together.
And having lunch.
Yeah.
At the time they were having lunch, as I understand.
We thought they were so safe. They thought they were safe. They were messaging us like, we can't hear a thing and we feel so happy and comfortable over here. And then when we got the news, it was just like, well, what do you mean? I think we went into a state of shock, all of us, collectively.
There is a video of the rubble and the devastation that has been circulating on social media, some news outlets. One of your uncles has also been interviewed, one of the very few survivors.
Yeah, one of the 4 survivors.
You can't find criminality that's worse than this anywhere in the world. This enemy is thirsty for blood. We're seeing what's happening with our brothers in Gaza. Now it's happening to us.
My uncle Hassan, he lost his 3 boys, his wife,
his whole
family,
his
basically.
brother, his mother, his aunts.
Yeah.
They're all
his sister.
family.
And just seeing him there, it broke our hearts. It's just he's all alone basically. He's injured. He's probably not even taking care of himself, and that's the last thing on his mind. It's hard to see our family like that through the screen. Like when I made the mistake of opening Instagram the first day, and I actually came across a photo of the house and I could see bodies. And I'm just looking, I'm like, that can't be my family. I'm trying to stop myself, but I'm zooming in. I'm like, I'm trying to look and see. I had to actually force myself to get out of the app. And it's just, how is it normal for people to open up social media and see their families in that state? How have we normalized that? It's not okay.
What were some of the things you had to do from here to try and find out who'd survived and who'd died?
At one point they said my cousin, one of the younger ones, wasn't in the house. And I was just like, okay, we have Ala, he's okay. And then our great aunties, they said, oh, they found them up the street. We assumed that means that they were just walking up the street. I think it turned out to be that they found their bodies up the street. They had flown away, basically.
So some were at the site and some were at the hospitals, checking if there's anyone who's arrived at the hospital. But like Zainab said, most of them were still under the rubble, but people were posting photos of the rubble with the bodies within it, and that was just.
So you had to see your family that way.
We saw them like that, and it was horrible.
Yeah, and they said at first it was 4 families, and I just assumed that they didn't think of our family as 4 families. I thought,
because we're just one family.
One extended family.
That's the thing. They were always together back in the village, always. Like, they're just together, and then they were displaced together. Now everyone's saying maybe a family should split up, because this is what people are thinking now. When is our turn? Literally, that is how people are thinking. So people are trying to get their families to split up so that if something happens, only part of the family is gone. I can't believe that that's how we're thinking.
That was 4 generations.
Exactly, 4
killed.
generations, from the grandmother to the great-great-grandchild. And that's it, they're all gone.
In the coverage that followed that attack, because there was a lot of coverage because it's so far from the Israeli border, it's also in a Christian town, so it went against everything that we had seen to date in the violence from the IDF. In some of that coverage, there was also a framing as though that building, that residential building, was hit because of a Hezbollah commander or a Hezbollah operative or something. How did you feel seeing that, and what's your response to that?
It had me questioning, like, who could have been in that house? Was my great-grandmother secretly a Hezbollah commander and we didn't know? Did she have a secret double life or something?
Did you really think that?
No. But at some point I was going crazy. I'm just like, was it one of the boys? Like, because all of our male cousins are gone, you know? And I was just thinking, like, was it one of the boys? Like, who could have it been? Like, I was thinking, maybe someone was living on top of them, because it has happened where they're taking out whole entire apartments because one level had a suspicious person.
I feel like it was just another excuse. Mm-hmm. They're running out of other excuses, and they feel like they can, people are stupid and they're not, onto them. They can't use that excuse anymore. They can't. There was no one there. They just hit them, accept it, and I feel like our family needs some kind of closure. We need someone to be held accountable for this. I know it won't bring them back, but we can't even be there for their burial. They had to bury them somewhere in the north, and heaven knows when they're going to be taken back to their village. We can't accept it. We cannot accept it anymore.
You have a survivor in your uncle Hassan and a cousin, Jinan, and you'd like to bring them to Australia. Yeah. What hopes do you have that a visa option would be available to Lebanese fleeing persecution?
So, we have my uncle Hassan and Jinan and her husband. We're trying to be hopeful because that's all we've got at this point, but it's not looking good. I'm just looking at other people trying to evacuate their families as well. And I feel like it's just so disrespectful to us. Like, we're just watching our family perish, and our government has made it very obvious that they don't care, and we know it's going to be hard for my uncle Hassan because he lost all of his papers in the house. He lost everything in that house. We've still got a little bit of hope that we can bring him here, that he can be with his brothers, that he could feel safe for even a little bit,
Nahed, as a Lebanese Australian, what would you say to Anthony Albanese in the lead up to the election?
All I can say is I have voted Labor since I turned 18 from the very first election, and I'm never voting Labor again in my life, ever again, because I've lost hope in everything the government represents. They have not represented us as people. They have not stood by us, and I'm just going to find other options from now on. I want my voice to be heard, and it's not being heard by the government. And I think most Lebanese Australians feel the same way. And everyone I speak to, no one's going to be voting any of the major parties ever again, because you're choosing a genocidal occupier over your own people. You're not hearing what your people are screaming and shouting and telling you they want.
How would you like these members of your family to be remembered?
We want them to be remembered as the beautiful, beautiful, beautiful people they were. I'm always going to remember their house in Lebanon that we stayed at. We used to have, I'm going to remember the lunches we had there, all the laughter and the screaming and the playing and all the beautiful, beautiful memories we had there. I'm going to remember my great-grandma as like the symbol of resistance that she is to me, you know. She lived 95 years. She's older than the state of Israel. She refused to leave her house during multiple wars. And I'm just going to remember her as my view of resistance, you know.
Nahed? I'm trying to remember everything. I mostly remember all the jokes we used to have together, all the good times we had together. I lived there for 9 years with them, and they were my family. I didn't have my mum and dad there, and they were everything to me. And that's what I'm going to focus on. I'm going to focus on all the good times we had together and keep their memory alive. That's all.
I'm so sorry. Alad Hamon, I'm so sorry for your loss. Nahed and Zainab Mawassi there. I contacted the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, as well as the Immigration Minister, asking if visitor or humanitarian visas for Lebanese is on their agenda, but I did not hear back. 1,300 Palestinians have made it to Australia after more than a year of human rights atrocities. That's according to the Refugee Council of Australia. Israelis were granted more than double the number of visas following the October 7 Hamas-led attacks. Amnesty International says 7,000 Palestinian visas have been rejected in that time. And the government did not confirm or deny those numbers when I sought clarification. I'm Antoinette Lattouf, and that's it for this episode of The Briefing.
Listener.